Do not break the silence. Chapter 1. The Rules. The taxi's headlights carved through the Yorkshire darkness, illuminating stone walls that seemed to lean inward like arthritic fingers. Elena Hartwell pressed her face to the window, watching the landscape grow increasingly desolate. 3 months since David's funeral, and she still found herself reaching for his hand in moments like these. "You sure about this, love?" The driver's voice carried decades of Yorkshire vowels. Blackthorne House has a reputation. Elena adjusted her wedding ring, a habit she couldn't break. It's temporary work, just cataloguing. The car rounded a final bend, and there it was, Blackthorne House, a Gothic monstrosity against the star-drunk sky. Its windows were dark except for a single light burning in what might have been the entrance hall. The building squatted on the moor like a wounded animal, all turrets and gargoyles and architectural wounds where ivy had pulled away chunks of stone. Right then, the driver wouldn't meet her eyes in the rearview mirror. 7 sharp, they said. "I'll be back at 6 a.m. on the dot." Elena paid him and stood on the gravel drive as his taillights disappeared into the night. The silence was absolute. No wind, no night birds, nothing but the sound of her own breathing. She checked her watch, 6:47 p.m. The front door opened before she could knock. Mrs. Hartwell. The man who greeted her was tall and angular, dressed in a worn tweed suit that might have been fashionable in the 1950s. His face was kind but tired, deeply lined around pale blue eyes. "I'm Mr. Pemberton from the Historical Trust. I trust your journey was acceptable?" "Yes, thank you." He ushered her inside, his footsteps echoing in the vast entry hall. The ceiling soared 3 stories above them, painted with faded murals of cherubs and clouds. A grand staircase curved upward into shadows. "Now then," Pemberton said, consulting his pocket watch. "Time is rather pressing, I'm afraid. The work schedule is quite specific, 7 p.m. to 6 a.m., as we discussed. The building is structurally unsound during daylight hours, you understand. Something to do with temperature variations in the foundation." Elena nodded, though she'd never heard of such a thing. "Your quarters are on the first floor. Bedroom, bathroom, small kitchen. The archives are primarily on the ground floor, though you may need to access the basement storage. The upper floors are off limits entirely." He paused at a heavy oak door. "Unsafe, you see." He led her through a labyrinth of corridors lined with filing cabinets and cardboard boxes. The air smelled of dust and something sweeter, like flowers left too long in a vase. Blackthorne House was a private asylum from 1923 to 1964, Pemberton explained as they walked. Specialized in treating women with difficult conditions. Hysteria, melancholia, unwanted pregnancies, the usual. His voice carried a note of distaste. It closed rather suddenly after an incident. Mass disappearance. Patients, staff, everyone. 43 people, gone without a trace. Elena shivered. What happened to them? No one knows. The official investigation was incomplete. The trust acquired the property last year to preserve the historical record. Terrible thing to lose, really. All those voices silenced. They stopped at a small room furnished with a desk, chair, and reading lamp. Boxes of documents lined the walls. "Your work area," Pemberton said. "Patient files, administrative records, personal effects. Everything needs to be catalogued and preserved. There's a typewriter for your reports." "What am I looking for exactly?" "Patterns, anomalies, anything that might explain what happened here." He glanced at his watch again. "I must go. I don't stay after 7, but before I leave..." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a cream-colored envelope sealed with red wax. The paper felt old under Elena's fingers, thick and expensive. "These are the house rules," Pemberton said quietly. "Please read them carefully and follow them exactly. Previous archivists found them helpful." Previous archivists? But Pemberton was already walking away, his footsteps quick on the wooden floor. "Remember, 6 a.m. sharp. The taxi will be waiting." Elena heard the front door close, followed by the sound of an engine starting. Then silence. She looked at the envelope in her hands. Her name was written on the front in spidery handwriting, Mrs. Elena Hartwell. The wax seal bore an unusual design, a tree with no leaves, its roots and branches forming a perfect circle. She broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. The paper was the same expensive stock as the envelope, and the text was typed on what looked like an old manual typewriter. For the safety of the archivist Blackthorne House, night shift regulations, the following rules must be observed during all night shifts. Compliance is mandatory for your protection. Rule 1. Do not speak aloud between 2:04 a.m. and 3:33 a.m., no matter what you hear. If you must communicate during this period, write it down. Rule 2. If a door closes by itself, leave it closed. Do not attempt to open it again until sunrise 6 a.m. Rule 3. The girl in the yellow dress is not real. Do not follow her, and do not allow her to speak to you. If she approaches, close your eyes and count to 50. Rule 4. If the previous archivist returns, pretend you do not see him. He will knock 3 times on any door or window. Never answer. Never acknowledge his presence. Rule 5. If the air turns cold and the lights flicker, lie down immediately and shut your eyes. Remain motionless until the temperature returns to normal. They will not touch you if you play dead. Rule 6. Above all, never ever ask who wrote these rules. Violations of these rules may result in permanent consequences. You have been warned. The letter was unsigned. Elena read it twice, then a third time. Her first instinct was to laugh. It read like something from a ghost story, the kind David used to mock when they appeared in the Sunday papers. But something about the tone stopped her. The language was formal, official, like a legal document or medical instructions. She checked her watch, 7:12 p.m., 11 hours until sunrise. Elena folded the letter and slipped it into her pocket. Whatever game this was, hazing the new employee perhaps, or local folklore designed to unnerve city visitors, she had work to do. The sooner she catalogued these files, the sooner she could return to London and decide what to do with the rest of her life. She opened the first box. Chapter 2. The Files. The patient files were heartbreaking. Elena worked methodically through box after box, creating an inventory list on the ancient typewriter. Each folder contained a life reduced to symptoms and treatments. Patient exhibits excessive emotional displays, refuses to accept husband. S. Authority, claims to hear voices of deceased children. The cases spanned 4 decades, but the pattern was consistent. Women brought here by fathers, husbands, brothers, all for the crime of being inconvenient. The treatments were medieval: ice baths, isolation, experimental surgeries. Dr. Cornelius Blackthorne, the Asylum's founder, had been particularly fond of something called silence therapy, extended periods of sensory deprivation designed to calm the hysterical mind. At 10:30 p.m., Elena found the first photograph. It was tucked inside a file marked Patient 247th, M. Whitmore, a formal portrait of a young woman with dark hair and intelligent eyes, wearing a simple white dress. Someone had written on the back in faded ink, "Margaret," before the silence took her. Elena set the photograph aside and continued reading. Margaret Whitmore, age 26, admitted in 1962 after suffering melancholic episodes following the death of her infant son. The initial reports described a articulate, educated woman who asked difficult questions about her treatment. The later reports were different. Day 30, patient has ceased verbal communication entirely. Dr. Blackthorne believes the silence therapy is showing positive results. Day 67, patient remains mute. Responds to simple commands but shows no interest in personal interaction. Weight loss continues. Day 94, patient found in her room arranging stones in patterns on the floor. When asked to explain, she pointed to the window and mouthed the word yellow. No yellow objects were visible. Elena turned the page and froze. The last entry was dated October 31st, 1964, the night everyone disappeared. Patient 247th has begun speaking again. She says the girl in yellow told her the rules were changing. She says we don't have to be silent anymore. Dr. Blackthorne has ordered her moved to the isolation ward immediately. That was all. Elena picked up the photograph again, studying Margaret's face. There was something familiar about her eyes, something that made Elena's chest tighten with recognition. She looked like someone who had lost everything and was still trying to understand why, like Elena herself these past 3 months. A clock somewhere in the house chimed 11 times. Elena rubbed her eyes. They were burning from the poor light and old paper. She stood to stretch, working the kinks out of her shoulders. That's when she noticed the door. The workroom had 2 entrances, the main door she'd come through, and a smaller door in the far corner that she'd assumed led to a closet. But now that smaller door was standing slightly ajar, revealing a slice of darkness beyond. Elena was certain it had been closed when she arrived. She approached cautiously, remembering Rule 2, if a door closes by itself, leave it closed. But this door had opened by itself. The rules didn't cover that scenario. She pushed it open wider. Beyond was a narrow staircase leading down into the basement. The walls were stone, slick with moisture, and the air that drifted up was several degrees colder than the room behind her. At the bottom of the stairs, she could see the faint outline of another door. Elena checked her watch, 11:17 p.m. Still plenty of time before the dangerous hours mentioned in the rules. And Pemberton had said she might need to access the basement's storage. She found a flashlight in the desk drawer and started down the stairs. The basement was larger than she'd expected, a series of connected chambers carved directly into the bedrock. Her flashlight beam revealed filing cabinets, storage boxes, and something that made her stomach clench, a row of metal doors with small windows like prison cells. The isolation ward. Each cell was perhaps 8 feet square, with a narrow cot and nothing else. The doors stood open now, their locks broken or rusted away. Elena peered into the first cell and saw scratches on the stone walls, tallies marking days or words carved by fingernails. In the third cell, she found more photographs. They were scattered on the floor like fallen leaves, dozens of portraits of young women, all wearing the same white asylum dress. Some were smiling tentatively, as if still hoping for rescue. Others stared at the camera with empty eyes. Elena gathered them up, studying each face. Beautiful women, young women, women who had been someone's daughter or wife before they became someone's inconvenience. At the bottom of the pile, she found a group photograph. It showed the asylum's final residents and staff, gathered in what looked like the main hall upstairs. The photo was dated October 30th, 1964, one day before everyone vanished. Dr. Blackthorne stood in the center, a tall man with severe features and cold eyes. Around him were nurses, orderlies, and patients. Elena held the flashlight closer, examining the faces. In the back row, partially hidden behind another woman, was Margaret Whitmore. But that wasn't what made Elena's breath catch. In the very corner of the photograph, almost out of frame, stood a young girl wearing a yellow dress. She looked perhaps 10 years old, with pale skin and dark hair. Unlike everyone else in the photo, she wasn't looking at the camera. She was looking directly at Elena. No, that was impossible. Elena blinked and looked again, but the sensation persisted. The girl's painted eyes seemed to track her movement, as if the photograph were a window rather than an image. Elena shook her head. Stress and grief were making her paranoid. She gathered the photographs and headed back upstairs, eager to return to the relative normalcy of patient files and typewriter keys. But as she climbed the narrow staircase, she could have sworn she heard footsteps behind her, small feet in small shoes, keeping perfect time with her own. Chapter 3. The first night back in the workroom, Elena tried to focus on cataloguing, but her mind kept drifting to the photographs. She'd arranged them on the desk in chronological order, creating a timeline of the asylum's final year. The pattern that emerged was troubling. The earlier photographs showed typical institutional scenes: patients in group therapy, staff meetings, meals in the communal dining room. But as 1964 progressed, the images became stranger. Patients were photographed alone in their rooms, often in unusual positions, lying on the floor, standing in corners, or arranging objects in geometric patterns. And in nearly every photograph from the final months, if Elena looked carefully, she could spot the girl in yellow somewhere in the background. Sometimes she was barely visible, a flash of color through a doorway or window. Sometimes she was more prominent, standing among the patients as if she belonged there. but according to the admission records, no child matching her description had ever been a patient at Blackthorne House. At 1:30 a.m., Elena heard the first sound. It was faint, almost lost beneath the house's natural settling noises, but definitely there, the sound of a door opening somewhere above her. Elena stopped typing and listened. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving across the floor directly overhead. Elena checked the rules again. Nothing about footsteps, nothing about noises from the upper floors. Pemberton had said the upper levels were off limits, but he hadn't said they were empty. The footsteps stopped. Elena waited, barely breathing, but the silence stretched on. She was about to return to her work when she heard something that made her blood freeze. A child's voice singing. The melody was barely audible, drifting down through the ceiling like smoke. Elena couldn't make out the words, but the tune was familiar. Something she'd heard on the radio, maybe, or hummed to herself without thinking. She checked her watch, 1:47 a.m., still 17 minutes before the silent period began. The singing stopped abruptly. Elena sat motionless, listening to her own heartbeat. Then, from somewhere much closer, somewhere on her own floor, came the sound of a door closing. If a door closes by itself, leave it closed. Elena stood carefully, moving toward the main door of her workroom. The corridor beyond was dark, lit only by the pale glow from her reading lamp. She could see the doors to other rooms, all closed, stretching away into shadow. But hadn't one of those doors been open when she'd first walked this corridor with Pemberton? She thought so, but she couldn't be sure. The silence was oppressive now, thick as fog. Elena backed away from the door and returned to her desk. She tried to type, but her fingers were shaking too badly to hit the right keys. 2:04 a.m. The silence period had begun. Elena put her hands in her lap and sat perfectly still. The reading lamp seemed dimmer now, casting long shadows that moved like living things. She focused on her breathing, counting each inhalation and exhalation. At 2:17 a.m. she heard David's voice. "Elena? Elena, where are you?" The voice came from the corridor, muffled but unmistakable. David's voice, with the slight Welsh accent he'd never quite lost, calling. Her name the way he used to when he came home from work. Elena's chest tightened. She gripped the edge of the desk so hard her knuckles went white. "Elena, I'm lost. I can't find you." The voice was closer now, just outside her door. Elena bit her lip to keep from responding. David was dead. She'd watched them lower his coffin into the ground. She'd thrown dirt on the wood with her own hands. "Please, love, I'm so cold. Why won't you answer me?" Tears ran down Elena's cheeks, but she didn't make a sound. Rule 1 was absolute. No speaking between 2:04 and 3:33 a.m., no matter what she heard. "Elena?" The door handle turned. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs as the door opened slowly, revealing the dark corridor beyond. She couldn't see anyone, but David's voice continued. "There you are. Why are you hiding from me?" The voice was inside the room now, moving closer. Elena could almost feel breath on her neck, the familiar warmth of her husband's presence. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around, to speak, to reach for him. Instead, she closed her eyes and counted to 50, just as the rules instructed for dealing with the girl in yellow. When she opened them, the door was closed and David's voice was gone. Elena sat shaking until 3:33 a.m., watching the minute hand crawl around her watch face. When the silent period finally ended, she whispered into the empty room, "I'm sorry, David. I'm so sorry." But she hadn't broken the rules. Chapter 4, Patterns in the Dark. The remaining hours of her first shift passed without incident. Elena catalogued patient files with mechanical precision, trying not to think about David's voice or the implications of following rules written by an unknown hand. When the taxi arrived at exactly 6 a.m., she had never been so relieved to see headlights through the window. She spent the day in her hotel room in the village, trying to sleep but mostly staring at the ceiling. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the girl in yellow or heard David calling her name. By evening, she'd convinced herself that stress and grief had made her imagine things. The footsteps could have been pipes settling. The voice could have been whined through broken windows. She almost believed it. The second night began the same way. Pemberton's departure at 7 sharp, leaving Elena alone with boxes of files and the weight of 6 impossible rules. She'd memorized them by now, but she kept the letter in her pocket anyway, a talisman against the darkness. This time, she started with the administrative records. Dr. Blackthorne's personal files revealed a man obsessed with silence as a form of treatment. His theories, recorded in meticulous detail, described speech as a symptom of mental instability in women. The female mind, when disordered, seeks to externalize its chaos through excessive verbalization. By removing this outlet, we force the patient to confront her internal discord and achieve a state of therapeutic quietude. Elena shuddered. The man had been a monster dressed in medical terminology. At 11:43 p.m., she found Dr. Blackthorne's final journal entry, October 31st, 1964. The patients are behaving strangely tonight. They gather in the common room without being instructed, standing in perfect silence, staring at the windows. When I approach, they turn to look at me with expressions I cannot describe, not defiant, not fearful, but expectant, as if they are waiting for something. Patient 247 Whitmore approached me in the corridor this afternoon. She has not spoken in months, but today she grabbed my arm and whispered, "She's coming back. The girl in yellow is coming back, and she's angry about what you did to us. I have ordered increased security for tonight. The staff are uneasy. Several have requested permission to leave early. I have denied these requests. Discipline must be maintained. There is something I have not recorded in the official files, something that happened during the asylum's first year of operation. A patient named Sarah Whitmore, Margaret's older sister, who claimed to see a girl in a yellow dress walking the corridors. Sarah became increasingly agitated, insisting the girl was trying to tell her something important. When I ordered Sarah moved to isolation, she fought the orderlies with surprising strength, screaming about rules and silence and the girl who would come back for all of us. Sarah died in isolation 3 days later. Heart failure, according to the death certificate, though she was only 24 years old. We buried her in the asylum cemetery behind the house. I am beginning to think Sarah saw something real. The entry ended there. Elena sat back in her chair, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. 2 sisters, both patients, both claiming to see the same impossible girl. Margaret had survived long enough to be photographed on the asylum's final day, but Sarah had died years earlier. Elena looked at the clock, 1:23 a.m. She had time before the dangerous hours began. She gathered her flashlight and headed for the basement. The isolation ward felt colder tonight, as if winter had moved into the stone walls. Elena's breath misted in the flashlight beam as she examined each cell more carefully. In the 5th cell, the one where Sarah might have died, she found fresh scratches in the wall. That was impossible. The asylum had been abandoned for decades, but the marks in the stone were pale and clean, as if they'd been carved recently. Elena traced them with her finger, trying to make sense of the symbols. They weren't random scratches. They formed letters, words carved in a desperate, shaking hand. She keeps us safe. The rules are for protection. Don't ask why, don't break the silence below that. In different handwriting, I should have listened. I should have followed the rules. Now I'm trapped here too. Elena's flashlight flickered and died, plunging her into absolute darkness. She fumbled for the light switch she'd noticed on the basement wall, but her hands found only cold stone. Panic rose in her throat as she realized she'd lost her bearings in the dark. The isolation cells all looked the same. She might be facing any direction. Then she heard it, the soft sound of bare feet on stone moving through the darkness toward her. Elena pressed herself against the wall and tried to remember the rules. Rule 5 mentioned cold air and flickering lights. She should lie down and close her eyes. But her flashlight had died, not flickered, and the temperature had been cold all along. The footsteps stopped directly in front of her. Elena held her breath, not daring to move. In the absolute darkness, she could hear her own heartbeat and nothing else. Whatever was standing there made no sound of breathing, no rustle of clothing. A child's hand touched her face. The fingers were ice-cold and small, tracing the line of Elena's cheek with gentle curiosity. Elena bit her tongue to keep from screaming as the hand moved to her lips, pressing lightly as if testing whether she would speak. She didn't. The hand withdrew, and the footsteps moved away. Elena counted to 100 before she dared to move, feeling her way along the wall until she found the stairs. She climbed toward the workroom without looking back, her heart hammering against her ribs. When she reached her desk, she found something that hadn't been there before, a new photograph, placed carefully on top of her papers. It showed the asylum cemetery on a misty morning. Rows of simple headstones marked the graves of patients who had died at Blackthorne House. In the center of the image, kneeling beside a particular grave, was the girl in yellow. She was placing flowers on the headstone, daisies, bright and fresh. Elena turned the photograph over. Someone had written on the back in a child's careful handwriting, "For Sarah. She was the first one to see me. The rules keep everyone safe now. Don't let them break the silence again." Elena checked her watch, 2:04 a.m. The silent period had begun. Chapter 5, The Previous Archivist. On the third night, Elena came prepared. She'd spent the day in the village library, researching Blackthorne House and the mass disappearance of 1964. The official reports were frustratingly vague. 43 people had simply vanished without a trace, leaving behind no signs of struggle or indication of where they might have gone. But local newspapers from the time told a different story. In the weeks leading up to the disappearance, several staff members had complained about strange occurrences at the asylum. Doors opening and closing by themselves, unexplained sounds in the walls, and sightings of a child who shouldn't have been there. Dr. Blackthorne had dismissed these reports as hysteria, but at least 3 nurses had resigned rather than continue working night shifts. One newspaper interview particularly caught Elena's attention. A former orderly named Thomas Marsh had quit his job just 2 weeks before the disappearance, claiming that the asylum was haunted. "There's something in that place that don't want to be ignored," Marsh had told the reporter. "The patients know it, even if the doctor won't listen. They've been trying to warn us, but nobody pays attention to what crazy women say." When asked what kind of warnings, Marsh had described patients drawing the same symbols over and over again, circles with lines through them, trees with no leaves, girls in dresses. "Like they're trying to write something down without words," he'd said. Elena recognized those symbols. She'd seen them carved into the walls of the isolation cells. Now, as she sorted through more patient files, she began to notice other patterns. In the final months before the disappearance, several patients had been caught writing notes to each other, a violation of asylum rules that should have resulted in punishment. But according to the records, Dr. Blackthorne had simply confiscated the notes without disciplinary action. Elena found one of those notes tucked into a file marked patient 198th. "A Morrison. She says the rules are changing. She says we don't have to be silent anymore if we're brave enough to listen. The girl in yellow knows things about this place, about what they did to Sarah. She's trying to help us, but we have to trust her. Don't tell the doctors. Don't tell anyone who might stop her. When she comes for us, we have to be ready." At 10:30 p.m., Elena heard a sound that made her blood freeze. 3 deliberate knocks on the main door of her workroom. She looked up from the files, her heart racing. Rule 4 was explicit. If the previous archivist returns, pretend you do not see him. He will knock 3 times. Never answer. The knocks came again, patient and measured. Elena gripped the edge of her desk and stared at the door. Through the frosted glass panel, she could see a shadow, the silhouette of a man standing in the corridor. He was tall and thin, wearing what looked like a coat and hat. "Hello?" A voice called from the corridor. It was cultured, educated, with the kind of accent Elena associated with universities and museums. "I know you're in there. I just want to talk." Elena didn't respond. "My name is Dr. Edmund Whitmore," the voice continued. "I was the previous archivist here. I think you've been reading about my family. My aunts Sarah and Margaret were patients here." Elena's hands shook. Margaret's file was open on her desk, the photograph of the asylum's final residents staring up at her. "I started this work 6 months ago," Dr. Whitmore said. "Like you, I was given rules to follow. Like you, I thought they were nonsense at first." 3 more knocks, softer this time. "I broke Rule 6, he whispered, his voice barely audible through the door. "I asked who wrote the rules. Do you know what happened when I asked?" Elena closed her eyes and counted to 50, the way the rules instructed for dealing with the girl in yellow. When she opened them, the shadow was gone. But the voice continued, now coming from somewhere deeper in the house. She showed me everything. The girl in yellow, she's not a ghost, Elena. She's something else. Something that was created here by all the silence, all the suppressed voices. She's trying to protect future visitors by teaching them the rules that keep her calm. Elena could hear footsteps now, moving through the corridors, getting closer. But I couldn't leave it alone. I had to know why. I had to understand what happened to my aunts, what Dr. Blackthorne really did in those isolation cells. The footsteps stopped outside her door. She's standing right behind me now, Elena. The girl in yellow. She's angry that I broke the rules, but she's giving me one chance to warn you before she makes me part of this place forever. Elena pressed her hands over her ears, but she could still hear the voice. Don't ask questions. Don't break the silence. Don't try to help the voices you hear. They're already gone, and trying to save them will only trap you here too. The footsteps moved away, fading into the distance. Follow the rules, Elena. Follow them exactly, or you'll end up like me. Then silence. Elena sat motionless until 2:04 a.m., when the silent period began. But this time, instead of David's voice calling to her, she heard something worse, the sound of dozens of people whispering at once, their words overlapping and indistinct, the voices of the vanished, still trapped in the walls of Blackthorne House, still trying to speak, even though no one was left to listen. Chapter 6. The Girl Speaks. Elena's fourth night began with research. She'd found Dr. Whitmore's belongings in a filing cabinet, personal items left behind when he'd vanished. His notebook revealed a man driven by family tragedy to understand what had happened at Blackthorne House. Day 12 found evidence that Dr. Blackthorne was conducting unauthorized experiments on patients in the isolation ward. Silence therapy was apparently a cover for something much worse. Day 23. The girl in yellow appeared to me tonight. She didn't speak, but she led me to a hidden room behind the boiler. Medical equipment, surgical tools, and records of procedures that were never reported to authorities. Day 31. I understand now. Dr. Blackthorne wasn't just treating mental illness, he was trying to remove it surgically. Experimental lobotomies, performed without consent or proper technique. Sarah died during one of these procedures. Day 45. The girl in yellow is Sarah. Not a ghost exactly, but what's left of her after what Blackthorne did. She exists in the silence between words, in the spaces where voices should be. The rules aren't arbitrary. They're a map of her territory, the places and times when she's strongest. Day 52. I asked her why she protects the archivists instead of driving them away. She touched my face and showed me visions. Other people who came here over the years, researchers and urban explorers who broke into the building. The ones who didn't follow rules. What happened to them was worse than disappearing. Day 67. I can't stop myself from asking questions. Every night I break Rule 6 a little more, trying to understand. She watches me with such sad eyes. I think she knows what I'm going to do, what I'm going to become. The notebook ended there. Elena set it aside and tried to focus on her cataloging work, but her mind kept drifting to the image of a child trapped between life and death, trying to protect strangers from a fate she'd already suffered. At 11:15 p.m., she heard singing again. This time Elena could make out the words. It was a lullaby, something she remembered from her own childhood. Golden slumbers kiss your eyes, smiles awake you when you rise. Sleep, pretty baby, do not cry, and I will sing a lullaby. The voice was sweet and clear, definitely a child's voice, drifting down from the upper floors. Elena checked the rules again, but there was nothing about singing, nothing about children's. Voices outside the silent period. She followed the sound. The staircase to the upper floors was blocked by a chain with a sign reading danger, structural damage, but the chain was old and rusty. Elena lifted it easily and climbed the stairs, following the singing. The second floor was a maze of patient rooms, their doors standing open like mouths. Moonlight streamed through broken windows, illuminating peeling wallpaper and debris-scattered floors. The singing seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the walls. Elena found her in the last room at the end of the corridor. The girl in yellow sat on a windowsill, her legs swinging gently as she sang. She looked exactly as she had in the photographs, perhaps 10 years old, with pale skin and dark hair. Her yellow dress was clean and bright, as if it had been pressed that morning. She stopped singing when Elena appeared in the doorway. "Hello," she said. Her voice was polite, carefully enunciated, the way children spoke when they'd been trained to mind their manners. "You're Elena. I've been watching you work." Elena remembered Rule 3. The girl in the yellow dress is not real. Do not follow her, and do not let her speak. But Elena had already followed her, and the girl was already speaking. "You're doing very well with the rules," the girl continued. "Much better than Dr. Whitmore. He asked too many questions." Elena wanted to run, but her feet felt rooted to the floor. The girl's eyes were dark and old, far too old for her face. "I know you want to understand," the girl said. "You want to know why the rules exist, who wrote them, what happened to everyone. But understanding is dangerous here. Knowledge is what trapped Dr. Whitmore, and it's what will trap you if you're not careful." Elena managed to close her eyes and start counting to 50, but the girl's voice followed her into the darkness. "I don't want to hurt you, Elena. I like you. You're sad, like I was sad, like all the women here were. Sad. But you have a choice I never had. You can leave. You can finish your work and walk away and never come back." Elena reached 47 in her count. "But if you ask the wrong questions, if you try to save people who are already gone, then you'll have to stay with us. Forever. Is that what you want?" 50. Elena opened her eyes. The room was empty, but on the windowsill where the girl had been sitting, someone had left a single yellow daisy. Chapter 7. The hidden room. Elena returned to her workstation with shaking hands, the daisy clutched in her palm. She tried to convince herself that stress and isolation were making her hallucinate, but the flower was real. She could smell its faint, sweet scent. She pressed it between the pages of Dr. Whitmore's notebook, marking his entry about the hidden room behind the boiler. If she was going to break the rules, she might as well break them thoroughly. The basement boiler room was in the deepest part of the house, past the isolation cells and down another set of stone steps. The boiler itself was ancient, a hulking iron beast that hadn't been used in decades. But behind it, just as Dr. Whitmore had described, Elena found a narrow gap in the stone wall. She squeezed through the opening and found herself in a room that shouldn't have existed. It was Dr. Blackthorne's private surgical suite, hidden from inspectors and staff alike. The walls were lined with medical instruments that belonged in a nightmare, bone saws, cranial drills, and devices Elena couldn't identify. A surgical table dominated the center of the room, its leather restraints dark with old stains. But it was the photographs that made Elena's stomach turn. They covered every available surface, hundreds of pictures documenting Dr. Blackthorne's treatments, before and after shots of patients, clinical images of surgical procedures, and group photos of women who had been subjected to his experiments. Elena recognized many of the faces from the asylum files. Margaret Whitmore was there, photographed both before and after her lobotomy. The after image showed a woman with empty eyes and a slack expression, the Margaret who had survived until the final night. But it was the pictures of Sarah that broke Elena's heart. They showed a vibrant young woman transformed into something hollow and broken. In the final photograph, Sarah lay on the surgical table, her head partially shaved, her eyes staring at nothing. Someone had written on the back, "Subject expired during procedure. Cause excessive neural trauma. Note, subject claimed to see apparitions until moment of death." Elena sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the horror of what she'd discovered. These women hadn't been patients. They'd been victims of a monster who'd used medical authority to torture and murder. That's when she noticed the journal on the desk. It was bound in black leather, its pages filled with Dr. Blackthorne's meticulous handwriting. The final entries described his growing obsession with Sarah Whitmore's visions. October 15, 1964, Sarah continues to insist she sees a child in the corridors. Today she claimed this apparition spoke to her, warning her about the silence that comes after screaming. The patient's delusions are remarkably consistent and detailed. October 20th, performed experimental surgery on Sarah to remove the source of her hallucinations. Patient died during procedure, but her final words were disturbing. She's real, and she's coming for you. I've ordered the body buried immediately. October 25th, strange incidents continue. Staff report doors opening and closing, cold drafts in sealed rooms, and the sound of a child singing. Several nurses have requested transfers. I have denied these requests. We cannot allow superstition to interfere with important work. October 30th, the patients are gathering tonight without instruction. They stand in silence, staring at the walls as if listening to something only they can hear. Patient 247th. Margaret Whitmore approached me today and spoke for the first time since her surgery. She said Sarah forgives you, but she won't let you hurt anyone else. October 31st, I understand now. Sarah didn't die. She transformed. The surgery removed her ability to speak, to exist in the normal world, but it couldn't destroy her entirely. She exists now in the spaces between sound and silence, and she's gathering the other victims to her. They're coming for me tonight, all of them. The patients have disappeared from their rooms, and the staff are gone too. I can hear them in the walls whispering my name. I should have listened when Sarah tried to warn me. I should have stopped while I still could. She's standing behind me now, the little girl in the yellow dress. She's holding the hands of all the women I killed, and they're all staring at me with such sadness. They're not angry. That's the worst part. They're not angry. They're disappointed. I think I understand the rules now. I think I know why she protects the archivists. She doesn't want anyone else to become like her. The journal entry ended there. Elena sat in the hidden room, surrounded by the evidence of Dr. Blackthorne's crimes, and finally understood what she was dealing with. The girl in yellow wasn't a ghost. She was something new, created by trauma and surgery, and the desperate need to protect others from the same fate. The rules weren't arbitrary. They were a survival guide written by someone who had learned, too late, how to avoid triggering the girl's protective instincts. But who had written them? Even as the thought formed, Elena knew she was breaking Rule 6. She was asking the forbidden question, the one that had trapped Dr. Whitmore and countless others. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees in an instant. Elena looked up to find the girl in yellow standing in the doorway, no longer alone. Behind her stood the shadowy figures of women in white asylum dresses. Margaret Whitmore, Sarah Whitmore, and dozens of others. Their faces were sad but not malicious, disappointed but not cruel. And at the front of the group, wearing a modern business suit and carrying a briefcase, stood Dr. Edmund Whitmore. I tried to warn you, he said quietly. I tried to tell you not to ask questions. The girl in yellow stepped forward, her dark eyes fixed on Elena's face. You broke Rule 6, she said in her careful, polite voice. Now you have to choose. You can join us and help protect the next archivist, or you can leave now and never remember what you've seen here. Elena's heart pounded as she realized the terrible truth. The rules hadn't been written by some anonymous authority. They'd been written by previous archivists, people who had asked too many questions and learned too much to ever leave. Dr. Whitmore had written the rules, and before him, someone else. And before that, another researcher who had dug too deep into Blackthorne House's secrets. The girl in yellow was growing stronger with each person who stayed, each voice that joined her chorus of protection. Choose quickly, the girl said. The sun rises in 2 hours, and after that, the choice won't be yours anymore. Chapter 8. The choice. Elena stood frozen in the hidden surgical room, surrounded by the evidence of Dr. Blackthorne's atrocities and the assembled spirits of his victims. The girl in yellow waited patiently, her head tilted slightly as if listening to something only she could hear. I don't understand, Elena whispered, then immediately regretted speaking. But the girl simply nodded, as if she'd expected the question. Dr. Blackthorne created me, the girl explained in her careful, measured voice, not intentionally. He was trying to remove the parts of Sarah's brain that let her see things that weren't supposed to be there. But instead of destroying those parts, the surgery freed them. Elena looked at the assembled spirits, recognizing faces from the photographs and files. Are you, Sarah? I'm what Sarah became, what all of them became, in pieces. The surgery, the isolation, the silence, it separated us from our bodies but not from our purpose. The girl gestured to the women behind her. We exist in the spaces between words now, in the quiet moments when people aren't supposed to speak. Dr. Whitmore stepped forward, his face haggard but kind. She's not evil, Elena. She's trying to prevent anyone else from suffering what we did. The rules keep visitors safe by teaching them when and how to avoid triggering her protective instincts. But if I follow the rules, I can leave? You could have, the girl said sadly, until you asked who wrote them. That question changes everything, because once you know the truth, you become responsible for it. Elena felt the weight of that responsibility settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. What happened to Dr. Blackthorne? He's here too, the girl said, but he's not with us. He's trapped in the isolation cells, reliving what he did over and over again. He wanted to create silence, so that's what he has. Perfect, eternal silence. Elena shuddered, remembering the cold touch of small fingers in the basement darkness. That was you, wasn't it? In the isolation ward, I was checking on him, making sure he remembers what he did. The girl's expression was serene, but her eyes held depths of old pain. He asks questions too sometimes, but I don't give him choices. Elena looked around the room at the instruments of torture, the photographs of suffering, the evidence of systematic abuse. Then she looked at the girl in yellow and her chorus of protectors, and suddenly the choice became clear. If I stay, what happens to me? You become part of the rules, Dr. Whitmore explained. You help us guide future visitors, protect them from asking too many questions or breaking the barriers we've built. You add your voice to the chorus that keeps this place contained. And if I leave, the girl smiled, and for a moment she looked like any normal child. Then you forget. You finish your cataloging work, you file your report, and you move on with your life. The grief you're carrying gets easier to bear, and eventually you find reasons to smile again. Elena thought of David, of the voice that had called to her during the silent hours. Was that really my husband I heard? No, the girl said gently. That was your grief, given voice by this place. The house amplifies loss, makes it harder to let go. But if you choose to leave, that voice will fade too. Elena closed her eyes, weighing her options. Stay and become part of something that protected others, or leave and reclaim her life. Both choices had a price. How many archivists have there been? 17, Dr. Whitmore answered. I was the most recent until you. Most of them chose to leave once they understood the cost of staying. But you didn't. His expression grew sad. My aunts were murdered here. I couldn't leave them to face eternity alone. Elena opened her eyes and looked at the girl in yellow. If I stay, do I get to keep my memories, my sense of self? Yes. You're not a victim like us. You're a volunteer. That makes all the difference. Elena thought of her empty house in London, of the grief that followed her like a shadow of the long years stretching ahead without David. Then she thought of the women who had suffered in this place, who had been silenced and tortured and forgotten. I have one condition, she said finally. The girl raised her eyebrows. You're not really in a position to negotiate. I want to help you find peace. Not just protection for future visitors, but actual peace. An end to this. The assembled spirits stirred, their forms becoming more solid as hope flickered across their faces. The girl in yellow studied Elena for a long moment. That would mean confronting Dr. Blackthorne directly, she said, breaking down the barriers that keep him contained in the isolation ward. It would be dangerous. But possible? Perhaps. If someone with living breath spoke his victims' names aloud, if someone bore witness to their stories, it might be enough to lay us all to rest. Elena felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. This was why she'd really come to Blackthorne House, not to escape her grief, but to transform it into something meaningful. Then that's what I choose, she said. I'll stay, but not forever, just long enough to help you finish what was started here. The girl in yellow smiled, and suddenly the room felt warmer. What about David? What about your life? Elena touched her wedding ring, then slowly removed it and placed it on Dr. Blackthorne's surgical table. David would understand. He always said I had a talent for helping people who couldn't help themselves. The girl nodded and extended her small hand. Then welcome to the new rules, Elena Hartwell. Let's go wake up the doctor. Chapter 9, Breaking the Silence. Elena followed the girl in yellow and her spectral companions through the basement corridors, past the isolation cells where Dr. Blackthorne had performed his experimental procedures. The air grew colder with each step, and Elena could hear something that made her skin crawl, the sound of someone weeping in the darkness. They stopped at the 5th cell, the one where Sarah Whitmore had died. The door stood open, but the interior was pitch black despite Elena's flashlight beam. "He's in there," the girl whispered, reliving the night of October 31st, 1964, over and over again. He experiences his victims' fear as his own, feels their pain as they felt it, but he's trapped in the loop. He can't move forward, can't change, can't find peace. Elena peered into the cell and saw a figure huddled in the corner. Dr. Blackthorne looked exactly as he had in the final group photograph. A tall, severe man in his 60s, wearing a white medical coat stained with old blood, but his face was twisted with terror, his eyes widened, staring. "Please," he whispered, rocking back and forth. "I didn't mean to hurt them. I was trying to help. I was trying to cure them." The girl in yellow stepped into the cell, and Dr. Blackthorne looked up at her with recognition and horror. "You," he breathed, "you're not real. You're just brain tissue, just neurons misfiring. I removed you. I cut you out. You tried," the girl said calmly, "but you couldn't cut out what I represented. You couldn't silence the voice that speaks for the voiceless." Elena entered the cell, her heart pounding. The assembled spirits of Blackthorne's victims followed, filling the small space with their presence. Margaret Whitmore stepped forward, her post-surgical face serene despite the damage that had been done to her. "Cornelius," she said, her voice gentle despite everything, "it's time to stop running from what you did." Dr. Blackthorne shook his head frantically. "I was helping them, women with hysteria, with melancholia, with unwanted thoughts. I was removing the diseased parts of their minds. You were silencing us." Sarah's voice came from the girl in yellow, layered with the voices of all the other victims. "You were cutting away the parts of us that questioned, that resisted, that refused to be quiet and compliant." Elena found her voice. "I've read your files, doctor. I've seen your surgical notes. You knew the procedures were experimental, dangerous, likely to cause death or permanent damage. You performed them anyway." "For science," Dr. Blackthorne whispered. "For the advancement of medical knowledge. For power," Elena corrected. "You enjoyed silencing women who threatened your authority. You enjoyed cutting away the parts of them that made them human." The doctor looked up at her with wild eyes. "Who are you? You weren't there. You don't understand what it was like, dealing with their constant chatter, their demands, their emotional displays." Elena knelt down so she was at his eye level. "I'm someone who's going to make sure your victims are remembered. I'm going to speak their names aloud, tell their stories, bear witness to what you did to them." She pulled out the list she'd compiled from the patient files. 43 names, 43 women who had disappeared on October 31st, 1964. "Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore," Elena began, her voice steady and clear, age 24, admitted for melancholic episodes after the death of her infant son, subjected to experimental lobotomy without consent, died during surgery. Dr. Blackthorne flinched as if he'd been struck. "Margaret Rose Whitmore, age 26, Sarah's younger sister, admitted for emotional instability after her sister's death, lobotomized and kept in isolation for 2 years before the final night." Elena continued reading, speaking each name with deliberate care. As she did, the spirits in the cell began to glow with soft light, their forms becoming more solid and distinct. Helen Catherine Morrison, age 19, admitted by her father for inappropriate attachment to a female friend, subjected to multiple surgical procedures. "Stop," Dr. Blackthorne pleaded. "Please, I remember them all. I remember every face, every procedure. I don't need you to remind me." Elena ignored him and kept reading. Dorothy Mae Stevens, age 31, admitted for refusing conjugal duties after her husband's return from the war, Died during experimental surgery on her frontal lobe. With each name, the cell grew brighter. The women Elena named stepped forward, their faces peaceful but determined. They surrounded Dr. Blackthorne, not threatening but simply present, demanding acknowledgement. "I'm sorry," the doctor whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry. I thought I was helping. I thought silence would bring you peace." The girl in yellow knelt beside him, her small hand touching his shoulder. "We know you believe that, but believing something doesn't make it right." Elena reached the end of her list, and, finally, Dr. Edmund Whitmore, age 34. He came here 6 months ago looking for answers about his family. He asked the wrong questions and paid the price. Dr. Whitmore stepped forward from among the spirits. "I chose to stay, Cornelius. I chose to help protect others from making the same mistakes we did." Dr. Blackthorne looked around at the assembled spirits of his victims, his face crumpling with the weight of decades of suppressed guilt. "What do you want from me?" The girl in yellow smiled sadly. "We want you to remember that we were people, not problems to be solved. We want you to carry our stories forward, to make sure no one forgets what happened here." "But I'm dead," Dr. Blackthorne whispered. "I died the night they came for me. I died with the knowledge of what I'd done." "You're not dead," Elena said gently. "You're trapped. Trapped by your own guilt and fear, unable to move forward or find peace. But you can change that." She held out her hand to him. "Help us tell the truth about Blackthorne House. Help us make sure the world knows what happened here, so it never happens again." Dr. Blackthorne stared at her outstretched hand, then at the faces of the women he had wronged. Slowly, trembling, he reached out and took Elena's fingers in his own. The moment their hands touched, the cell filled with blinding light. Epilogue: The New Rules. 6 months later, Elena sat in the archives of the Royal College of Physicians, putting the finishing touches on her comprehensive report about Blackthorne House. The document was over 300 pages long, meticulously researched and documented, telling the complete story of Dr. Cornelius Blackthorne's crimes and their consequences. The official investigation had been swift and thorough once Elena presented her evidence. The bodies of 43 women had been found in the Asylum cemetery behind Blackthorne House, their graves unmarked but their identities confirmed through dental records and personal effects. Dr. Blackthorne's hidden surgical suite had yielded enough evidence to posthumously charge him with multiple counts of murder, assault, and medical malpractice. The case had made international headlines, sparking new discussions about patient rights and the historical abuse of women in psychiatric institutions. But Elena's report told a different story, one that wouldn't appear in any official records. She wrote about the girl in yellow, about the spirits who had lingered in Blackthorne House for decades, seeking not revenge but recognition. She wrote about Dr. Edmund Whitmore's sacrifice, about the rules that had protected 17 archivists from joining the chorus of the lost. And she wrote about the moment when Dr. Blackthorne finally accepted responsibility for his crimes, when the light that filled the isolation cell carried all of them, victims, perpetrator, and witnesses, into whatever comes after trauma finds its voice. Elena had been the only living person to witness that final moment of reconciliation. She had watched as the spirits of Blackthorne's victims smiled with genuine peace for the first time in decades. She had seen Dr. Blackthorne's face transform from terror to acceptance as he finally understood the humanity of the women he had silenced. And she had felt the girl in yellow's small hand slip from hers as Sarah Whitmore, whole again, no longer fragmented by surgical trauma, walked into the light with her sister Margaret and all the others who had waited so long to be remembered. Elena closed her laptop and gathered her papers. Tomorrow, she would submit her report to the Historical Trust, and Blackthorne House would be demolished. The site would become a memorial garden, with 43 trees planted in memory of the women who had died there. But tonight, she had one final task. Elena drove through the Yorkshire darkness to Blackthorne House one last time. The building stood empty now, its windows dark, its corridors silent. The oppressive atmosphere that had once filled its rooms was gone, replaced by simple quiet. She walked through the house with a flashlight, checking each room methodically. In the workroom where she'd spent so many terrifying nights, she found a single piece of paper on the desk. New rules, written in her own handwriting for future visitors to sites of historical trauma. The following guidelines are offered to those who seek to understand the past while honoring those who suffered. Rule 1. Remember that every document represents a human life. Treat each story with the respect you would want for your own. Rule 2. Listen to the voices that have been silenced, but don't let their pain become your prison. Rule 3. When you encounter evidence of institutional abuse, speak it aloud. Say the victims' names. Bear witness to their experiences. Rule 4. Understand that seeking truth sometimes requires accepting responsibility, for remembering, for speaking out, for ensuring such things never happen again. Rule 5. Know when to leave. Some stories need to be told, but the living must choose life over the compulsion to join the dead. Rule 6. Above all, never let anyone convince you that silence is protection. Silence protects only those who benefit from concealment. These rules are written by Elena Hartwell, final archivist of Blackthorne House, in memory of Sarah Whitmore and all who found their voices in the end. Elena folded the paper and slipped it into her pocket. As she walked toward the front door, she could have sworn she heard something that made her smile, the faint sound of children playing somewhere in the distance, their laughter bright and free. She stepped outside and didn't look back. Behind her, Blackthorne House settled into its final silence, not the oppressive quiet of suppressed voices, but the peaceful rest of stories finally told. Elena drove back to London with her windows down, letting the Yorkshire wind carry away the last echoes of institutional horror. She had work to do, articles to write, lectures to give, a world to remind that the price of forgetting is always higher than the cost of remembering. But first, she was going to visit David's grave and tell him about the choice she'd made, about the voices she'd helped to find, about the strange and terrible and beautiful ways that love sometimes manifests as the courage to break dangerous silences. Some rules, Elena had learned, are meant to be broken. The trick is knowing which ones and when and why. The end.